sunny day, a grassy hill, a big castle is on the horizon. A young man strolls toward the city, and judging by the wide eyes and the awestruck smile, he is a country bumpkin. He wanders through the streets and stops to join a crowd outside the castle. On a balcony overlooking the courtyard stands a familiar-looking king. However, Merlin's eye is caught by a beautiful but distraught-looking young woman watching from a nearby window. Before them, a man is forcibly marched up onto a scaffold, and the king raises his arms to address the crowd. The man is beheaded, and the crowd recoils. But King Arthur seems cheerful enough, reminding them all that it has been 20 years since the great dragon was captured and inviting them all to enjoy the celebrations.
20 years since the great dragon was captured. Let the celebrations begin.
However, at that moment, a cry goes up in the crowd. An old woman steps forward and swears vengeance for the life of her son. Before the guards can grab her, she disappears in a hurricane. She has conjured with a necklace she wears around her neck. Merlin glances up to see the woman close the window. Merlin is looking for a man named Gaius, but his quiet entrance into the man's chamber startles the elderly court physician. And unfortunately, he's balancing halfway up a bookcase. Fortunately, Merlin has the ability to telekinetically slide a bed across the floor and break the man's fall. Gaius gets to his feet and demands to know who he is and where he studied magic. Merlin denies all knowledge of anything that's just occurred, but the truth is obvious. Once Gaius has ascertained that this is his sister Huneth's son, he directs Merlin to put his bag in his room, warns him to keep his magic a secret, and thanks him for saving his life. Merlin gives him a letter from his mother. Gaius stares into the distance thoughtfully as Merlin opens his bedroom window and looks out with excitement over Camelot. Morgana, the young woman that Merlin saw earlier, and demands to know why she's not at the feast. She isn't impressed with his execution of the man and expresses her sympathy for his mother. Other is equally unimpressed with her claims that he is only making enemies in his crusade against magic and insists that she be civil when his special guest arrives.
You know, the more brutal you are, the more enemies you'll create.
The special guest is Lady Helen, a young singer who is currently camped out in the woods on her way to Camelot. She is getting ready for bed when an old woman enters her tent and begins stabbing a straw effigy. Helen keels over in pain before dropping dead on the bed. The witch uses her necklace to transform herself into the youthful Helen, though her reflection in the mirror still shows her true form. The next morning, after a restless sleep in which his name is repeatedly intoned by a deep voice, Merlin awakes to a litany of chores that Gaius has prepared for him. He delivers various potions to Gaius's patients and is just passing the training grounds when he notices a servant boy being bullied by a group of knights. The ringleader is using him as target practice by hurling knives at him. When the servant drops it in exhaustion, Merlin decides to step in. He warns the young knight against such behavior, though he only gets laughed at for his trouble. After a round of insults is exchanged, the knight challenges Merlin to take a swing at him. When Merlin fails miserably and finds himself with his hands pinned behind his back, he realizes he's made a big mistake. Throughout all of this, another young woman watches with concern from an upper window as Merlin is escorted down to the dungeons and thrown into a cell. That night, the witch disguised as Lady Helen gallops with her escort into Camelot and is greeted warmly by Other in the throne room. Once again, Merlin is haunted in the night by a voice that calls to him, and he's relieved to find that Gaius has secured his release the following morning, only it comes at a price.
Is a small price to pay.
Locked securely in the stocks, Merlin is pelted with rotten fruit and vegetables by a group of children as Gaius watches in amusement. There is a short reprieve as the children restock their ammunition, and Merlin looks up with interest at the approach of a young woman. She shyly introduces herself as Guinevere, known as Gwen, who works as a maid for Lady Morgana.
I'm Guinevere, but most people call me Gwen.
She just wanted to tell Merlin that she was impressed at the way he stood up to Prince Arthur, whom she considers a bully. The two awkwardly shake hands, and then Gwen makes a run for it as spectators line up with more vegetables. Over dinner, Gaius once again warns Merlin about staying out of trouble, telling him that Other has banned magic ever since the birth of Arthur. There is no magic in Camelot save for the great dragon, who was kept chained underground as an example. With that handy bit of exposition over, Gaius sends Merlin off with a tonic to give Lady Helen her voice.
Take a preparation to Lady Helen. She needs it for her voice.
Merlin finds her room empty but casts an interested glance over a magical book and the straw effigy that the witch has left in full view of anyone who might wander in. He's caught in the act of snooping by Helen returning to her room, but covers it by giving her the tonic. However, he manages to see her true reflection in the mirror behind her as he leaves.
Deliver this.
Merlin is heading back to Gaius when he passes Arthur in the street, who goads him into another confrontation. Arthur throws Merlin a mace and then advances with his own. Merlin clumsily tries to handle the weapon, but as the fight escalates and the crowd gathers, he falls back on a few discreet magic tricks to trip, distract, or otherwise hinder the prince. Arthur finally catches his foot in a bucket and goes toppling backward, at which point Merlin gets distracted by a disapproving Gaius watching him. Arthur takes the opportunity to knock Merlin to the ground with a broom, but then commands the guards to release him.
Let him go.
How could you be so foolish?
Back in Gaius's quarters, Merlin is berated for his behavior, and we get our very first shirtless scene when Gaius tends to the scrapes on Merlin's back. Sadly, Merlin wonders why he even has powers, and Gaius tells him that perhaps someone else has the answer he seeks. That night, the voice once again awakened Merlin. He follows it back to the dungeons and distracts a pair of guards by telekinetically rolling their dice across the floor and out of reach. He sneaks past with a lit torch and heads down a dark stairwell. At the end of the tunnel, Merlin enters a huge subterranean cave. With a clap of wings and a rush of wind, a massive dragon hurtles down from the darkness and lands on a stone outcropping before Merlin.
I'm here.
A chain is secured around his foot, but he looks at the gobsmacked Merlin keenly. The next morning, Gaius has more errands for the sleep-deprived Merlin, including a tonic for Morgana. According to Gaius, she suffers from nightmares. According to Merlin, he can relate. Merlin finds Morgana's room and, as is his way, wanders in. This time he's hit the jackpot, as Morgana is disrobing behind a screen as she complains about Arthur. Thinking that Gwen has entered,
Gwen? I'm here.
Morgana asks Merlin to pass her address, and once he's shaken himself out of his stupor, he throws it over the screen. Morgana's questions to Gwen become more specific, and Merlin is about to bolt for it when the real Gwen enters the room and hurriedly covers for her new friend. Now considerably more eager to attend the feast, Morgana chooses her most anachronistic dress in order to.
Or give them a night they'll really remember.
That night, after the false Lady Helen has dispatched off a young servant girl who was unlucky enough to spot her real reflection in the mirror,
Fallen angel.
the court gathers in the banquet hall. Both Arthur and Merlin are struck dumb by Morgana's grand entrance and fail to notice Guinevere as she sidles in alongside her.
God have mercy.
However, in the most glorious example of dramatic irony that this series has to offer, Merlin and Gwen have the following conversation.
She looks great, doesn't she?
Yeah.
Some people are just born to be queen.
No.
I hope so. One day.
Celebratory horns signal King Arthur's entrance, and everyone finds their place at the tables as he introduces Lady Helen.
Lady Helen of Mora.
The witch enters to the court's applause and takes her place upon the dais at the end of the hall. She begins to sing a strange, haunting, lulling tune that gradually grows in intensity as she advances. Merlin looks around in alarm as the court begins to fall asleep. The candles extinguish, and cobwebs begin to form over the guests and servants as they fall under the enchantment, including Gaius at the table, Gwen against the wall, and other flanked by Arthur and Morgana on their thrones. Merlin realizes that Helen has turned her death glare onto Arthur as she pulls a dagger from her sleeve. Merlin's eyes flash as he turns his gaze to the chandelier that hangs directly above her, and with his magic, he makes it plummet straight down, crushing the witch beneath it. The court awakens, muttering in confusion and pulling off the cobwebs. But just before she dies, the witch hoists herself up and hurls her dagger at Arthur's chest. Merlin races toward the banquet table and yanks Arthur out of harm's way. The two of them topple to the ground as the dagger spins into the back of the throne. Arthur and Arthur stare at Merlin in shock. The court applauds as Merlin and Arthur stare at each other in undisguised disgust. Gaius raises his eyebrows, and Gwen claps slowly with a sympathetic smile on her face. Back in Merlin's chamber, Gaius suggests that saving people may well be the proper use for Merlin's magic, though Merlin is less keen about the idea of saving Arthur on a regular basis. Just before Merlin answers Prince Arthur's summons,
Merlin, Prince Arthur wants you right away.
Gaius gives him a book of magic and extracts a promise from him that he'll keep it secret and study it carefully.
Your destiny's calling. You better find out what he wants.
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to the channel and smash the bell button. Write in the comments section what kind of movie you would like to see next.